what you're describing is the idea, an inflationary model, like what we have with the US dollar, for example, incentivizes me to get out of cash, right? And get into either hard assets or to spend that capital, because if I hold it, it loses value, right? And so that inflationary model, for many people, they spend, or they take that cash and they buy real estate, or they buy other investment opportunities, because they know that they have to at least do better than 2%, right, on their yield for the year. Because if they leave it in cash, they're going to lose 2%, right, give or take, based on inflation. And so the argument that you're making here is, let's take, I don't know, 5, 10, 20, 30% of the real estate market is actually wealth preservation, right? And if people were given the choice, rather than buy real estate, they would rather take that exact same value and hold it in the cash equivalent, right? They don't do it because today that loses money. But if there was a global digital deflationary currency, the real estate total market cap would shrink, because people would move from real estate back into that global currency. And this would not only happen in real estate, but in a number of kind of store of value type asset classes where people today find safety to get out of cash and preserve wealth, but that may not be true in the future.
Precisely. I think that this really, the market for the global total addressable market for monetary instruments is a zero-sum game. For Bitcoin to win, other things have to lose.
Mm-hmm. Other currencies or other asset classes, or both?
Currencies, both. And that is part of the reason why I believe that Bitcoin, the single currency, will be bigger than in their quote-unquote market cap, or in the amount of wealth that is stored inside it, will be greater than not just any, but all of current fiat currencies and monetary metals added together. Because I believe that Bitcoin is such a good store of value that it will take more than 95% of the current market cap of fiat currencies. It will take more than 75% of the current market cap of monetary metals. And then, and this is sort of the interesting part, I think because the current fiat currencies are inflationary, a lot of high net worth individuals and asset managers around the world use the stock market, use the fixed income markets, use the real estate markets as a store of value. That is part of the reason why if you try to buy an apartment in Tokyo, London, or New York, the prices are insane. And this is because both American high net worth individuals and foreign high net worth individuals use these sort of prime city luxury apartments as one of their stores of value. And I believe that sort of because the fiat currencies are constantly diluted, at the same time, this has caused an artificial sort of increase in the value of other asset classes and other financial instruments as people are hunting for yield. The aggressive sort of quantitative easing and the aggressive sort of unorthodox negative interest rate monetary policies of some central banks since the financial crisis have exacerbated this effect even further. And if you look at the inequality and the Gini coefficient, it has increased sharply since 2008 in the last 10 years, even more. One of the reasons for that, out of several, I mean, of course, it's a very multivariate topic, but one of the reasons is because the working class and the lower classes, they mostly store their wealth in cash. Most of them live pay to paycheck, and whatever savings they have, they do keep it in cash, just for simplicity's sake. Now, the asset owners are those who own real estate, stocks, bonds, etc. And a lot of the wealth has flown there. And a lot of people, although essentially the people who've benefited the most from this grand wealth effect experiment are people who are holding these assets. And much of the time, it is the central banks themselves who are indiscriminate and price insensitive buyers of these financial instruments.
Well, so this is important because there's a thought process that inflation is merely the act of stealing wealth from the poor and enriching the elite and wealthy, right? And so what that means is if you live paycheck to paycheck and you leave a high percentage of your net worth in cash, then every year you're losing value, right? You're losing purchasing power. But if you actually have other assets, and a lot of them, inflation continues to drive the price of those assets up, and therefore those that own non-cash assets actually benefit drastically from inflation and are incentivized to keep the party going, right? And so if you switch to a deflationary model, actually the people with the preference to have a high percentage of their net worth in the currency will benefit drastically, and those in non-cash assets will actually not benefit in this scenario.
For sure. And I like to describe Bitcoin and sort of this entire sort of phenomena as a grand wealth transfer event. And I believe that it will be arguably the single biggest wealth transfer event in human history. It will be a wealth transfer from the old to the young, from the tech savvy to sort of the more conservative, from the open-minded to sort of the more closed-minded, and of course from the people who will be holding these crypto assets, and most of all Bitcoin. And the losing side in this case would be people holding fiat currencies, gold, etc.
Absolutely. So let's say that everything you've described is true, right? And you just laid out the blueprint for how this is going to play out over the next decade, 2, 3, 4 decades, right? How big is the opportunity, right? What is the market cap of Bitcoin 10 or 20 years from now?
So like before I answer that question, I'll say that as Bitcoin, let's say 6 to 8 years from now, as it's a bit bigger, much more volume, much more Lindy effect, much more trust, much more credibility, etc., much more mainstream, people will simply compare two things, and Bitcoin will be in a free market battle against fiat currencies and gold simultaneously, and even other things when you just isolate the store of value component, as we have discussed. People will simply say, okay, this thing is expanding at 6% per year in its supply, and this thing is expanding at 1% per year in its supply. Which one should I pick as a store of value? And that's why, to me, sort of this feedback loop is inevitable. It will be so difficult to stop.
The math becomes undeniable.
It is really, if you sort of extrapolate this phenomena and extrapolate this sort of wave of financial change, Bitcoin will be a black hole that will absorb a tremendous amount of value. I believe the total addressable market is somewhere between 100 and 200 trillion. I like to say it will be 160 trillion. So if Bitcoin, and that is if we go off of the $10 million per Bitcoin price in today's terms, without even counting the sort of the inevitable hyperinflation of fiat currencies. And so this is my reasoning.
So you think that a single Bitcoin will be worth $10 million
in today's money?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I do. And
which would give us a market cap of what, like
160 trillion. Right now, the current market cap of Bitcoin is 110 billion. I believe when this bear market is done, give or take, we'll bottom somewhere around 80 billion. And so that's a 2000x that is still possible between right now and what is probably our death. And I think like there's still a tremendous opportunity here. And I think high net worth individuals, more sort of edgy, open-minded, tech-savvy institutions, and eventually government institutions will push this to the extreme.
These are big numbers you're talking, and you realize that very few people in the world believe what you believe right now.
I realize that. But if you spend sort of months and months studying this, it sort of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy to you. I'm very confident. Bitcoin will be bigger than the US dollar, and potentially even bigger than all of them combined. Because there's an interesting table that Vijay Boyapati has made. And he says that cryptocurrencies, or Bitcoin in particular, are harder to tax, harder to seize, easier to transfer, easier, sort of harder to steal, easier to sort of cheaper, easier, faster to send around the world. They are borderless. They are sort of uber competitive. They're highly deflationary, etc. And there's dozens and dozens of reasons. And all of these combined, I believe, will make Bitcoin incredibly big. Similar to what the gold standard was in the late 19th century, but given the fact that the economy is much bigger today, and given the fact that it is digital and sort of much more fluid, I believe it will be far, far greater than even that.